Now, let's take a look at mode. So the mode of a data set is the data entry that occurs with the greatest frequency. So let's start example 4. They want part. So this one's going to have a few parts here. Part A says find the mode of the weights from example number 1. And that's all it says. I'm going to enter down some. Part B, it says one of the 235 pound adults does not participate. What is the new mode? See, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we've got C. That's going to say the organizers accidentally left out a 285 pound participant. Find the new mode. And often when you see mode, you'll see it mode or modes, plural. We'll see why here in a second. Okay, so from example 1, let's write down, I'm going to write down the data in order like I did on example 2. It just makes it easier to see for mode. You do not have to order them, but it makes it easier. So 223, 223, 235, 235, 268, 274, 285, and 290. So the way I like to think of mode, I'm going to write the word out here, mode. I like to think of it as most often. Mode is most often. So which of my data values occurs most often in the original data set? That would be these 235s right here. So the mode, the most often, is equal to the 235 pounds. That's all there is to it. Okay, so let's look at part B. One of the 235 pound adults does not participate. What is the new mode? So my first thought process is to rewrite the data but remove a 235. So 223, 235, 268, 274, 285, 290. I removed one of the 235s. Okay, is there one now that doesn't really, or sorry, is there one that stands out? Like it's in there more often. It's in there the most often. No, all of them are in there once. When that happens, there is no mode. But why? I want there to be one. Each weight only occurs once. We're not going to be Oprah here. You're a mode, everybody's a mode. No, no one occurs the most often. No weight occurs the most often. There is no most often value. So there's no mode. No most often value. Okay. Then they tell us that the organizers accidentally left out a 285-pound participant. Find the new mode or modes. Okay, so again, writing our data entries down. 223, 235. Remember there was two 235s originally. 268, 274, 285. There's another 285 because they left him out. Not so sad. 290. Okay, now they ask us to find the new mode or modes. Is there anything that occurs more often than the other values? Well, if I'm looking here, I see two 235s. I see two 285s. So there are two modes here. $235 and 285 pounds. When this happens, we call this bimodal. Why bimodal? Well, how many wheels does a bicycle have? Two. There are two modes here. That is bimodal data. Okay. So that is that example. So now, let's talk about advantages and disadvantages of each of them. Advantages and disadvantages. So, although the mean, median, and mode each describe a typical data entry. I'll talk about what that means here in a second. There are advantages and disadvantages to using each measure. Okay, now, what it means by describes a typical data entry, because I didn't really talk about this definition. This typical data entry piece, what that means is that it is not on the end of the data. So, using just this mode, for instance, that we calculated in the previous example, is the 235 or the 285 the maximum or minimum entries? No, it's in the middle. It's in the minimum. The minimum is 223. So my mode was not 223. I'm safe. It is a typical data entry. My mode is not 290. I'm safe. So that means the modes are typical data entries. Had the mode been on either end, we would say it is not typical because it's the biggest entry or it's the smallest entry. But typical means it's not the biggest, it's not the smallest. And it's just kind of somewhere in the middle. Mean and median, you typically won't have to worry about it being, on the end, being not typical. Mode, you got to watch out for. It could be. Okay, so let's talk about each of them. Let's talk about some advantages and disadvantages. So for mean, well, the mean takes into account every data entry. But it's greatly affected by outliers. Like, well, how do you know that? We haven't seen an example of that. Think of your grade. What happens if your grade is high and you're doing great and you make a 0? What happens to your grade? It drops. And it goes boom. You're like, what? I just made 1 0? Really? Mean is greatly affected by outliers. So you get to use every entry. Yay! But outliers make it swing widely. Okay, let's look at median. It takes into account every data entry. And is not affected by outliers. I mean, if I think of the difference between mean and median, mean, you add them all up, divide by how many there are. If I were to add a very high weight, like on this weight loss deal, let's say I were to add a 400, that's going to pull that mean way up. If I were to add a 400 here, the median would only move up like 3. The mean would skyrocket, but the median only would go up 3 pounds. If I think of adding a 400 after the 290, that means the median would be between 268 and 274. It'd actually be 271. So I added 110, like a observation that's way out there, but it only moved the median 3 pounds. Median is pretty rock solid. That's why when you look at housing prices or salaries, they typically quote the median salary because that's what's in the middle. I mean, if you're looking at the housing prices in Lufkin, you want to know about the median. You don't want to know the average price because if there are, let's say most of the houses are between 300 to 400,000, but then you get a few houses that are worth $9 million, that's going to pull that mean way up. I can't afford a house here. It's too expensive. Well, it's because of those 2 $9 million houses. So we look at the median that kind of discards a little bit those $9 million houses and focuses still on the middle of the data. Okay, so now mode. Mode is like the red-headed stepchild, I'll be honest. This is the only measure of central tendency. Make sure I'm spelling it right. That can be used to describe data at the nominal level. But is rarely used with quantitative data. We don't really deal with mode when it comes to numbers. We just don't. We can say, oh, there are more red cars. Great. That gives us some info. Red is the most common color. Okay, great. Or there's the most, the most cars are white or black or whatever. That gives us info about the data. We don't really use it too much with quantitative data. So that's the big drawback for mode. But anyways, I'm going to stop there. That is an overview of mean, median, and mode. In the next video, we're going to kind of tie everything all together. And then get into weighted mean and grouped means. So